wpfw, Washington.
Good evening. It's just about 6 p.m. in the nation's capital. My name's Garland. The name of the Garland Nixon. The name of the show is News Views on every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas. And I see I got some viewers already. And Facebook Live. You can go to my show, Real Progressives. Go to the Facebook page. It's called Real Progressives. You can join the other 85,000 members we have on the Real Progressives. That's right, over 85,000 members now on Real Progressives. You got to join the Real Progressives webpage, and we got a bunch of viewers there. And it's live video on Facebook Live. A lot of great stuff to talk about. You know, we have a lot of great guests. We had Lee Camp. We got to get Lee Camp on here again. We had him a couple weeks ago. Tonight, a fantastic guest again. You know, every now and then we have a legendary guest. As you probably know, a few years ago, I'll never forget, one of my dear friends, Paul Robeson Jr. was on. I still got the audio. I'll play that sometime. That was incredible, the late Paul Robeson Jr. Well, tonight, we have another really legendary guest. We have Dr. Julius Garvey. Dr. Garvey is the name Garvey may strike a note with you. You might have heard of his father, Marcus Garvey. The legendary Marcus Garvey, an incredible, brilliant man, a leader, an activist, and a man who was done wrong, like pretty much all black leaders and activists, by the United States at the hands of one J. Edgar Hoover. But we've got Dr. Julius Garvey. Dr. Garvey, are you on?
I'm on.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I had to start off. Great to hear from. So where are you these days? What's going on with you, Dr. Garvey?
I'm in New York. That's where I live and work.
Wonderful, wonderful. So just so people will know, other than being the son of Marcus Garvey, tell us a little bit about you, about Dr. Garvey. Who is Dr. Garvey and what do you do?
Well, I'm a physician, and basically I'm a cardiothoracic and vascular surgeon. At this stage of my life, I do mostly vascular. Okay. And I leave the heart and that kind of stuff to the younger fellas. So I still practice. I'm sort of part-time in New York out on Long Island.
Fantastic, fantastic. And did you know, I'm sure you knew Paul Robeson Jr., didn't you?
You know, I've met him once, yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, he was actually, I've had him on my show before when he was around, and he was actually a mentor of mine for a couple years. So let's talk about what's happening with you. I understand that there's a move afoot to make some changes regarding the legacy of your father. Maybe you could talk about that a bit.
Sure. My dad was convicted in 1923 of supposedly conspiracy to use the mail to defraud people with the Black Star Line shipping company that he had and the UNIA had. And this was a trumped-up, trial promulgated by J. Edgar Hoover, etc. And, we can talk more detail about it, but basically, there was no evidence, etc. And it was political, and there was perjury, there was judicial misconduct, and so on and so forth. But this has stayed against his name over all this time. Mm-hmm. And, he's honored everywhere in the world. I mean, he's the first national hero in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. He's a hero of the Organization of American States. Mm-hmm. He's the only black man who is considered a hero in the whole, Organization of American States. Mm-hmm. There's streets and parks. I was just up in Connecticut 2 weeks ago to cut the ribbon for a park in Hartford for Marcus Garvey. And, there's streets here in New York and uptown New York and Harlem and mm-hmm. Brooklyn, etc., all over the country, named after him. And every guy who plays basketball or whatever, his first name is Marcus. Right. He was named after Marcus Garvey. Right. And the parents were probably Garveyites. But the point is that he's honored universally in Africa, all over. I was recently in Namibia mm-hmm. and South Africa lecturing, etc., invited by the Steve Biko Foundation, who was the leader in Black consciousness. I was just with the grandson of Nelson Mandela, who told me how his grandfather taught him about Marcus Garvey, etc. And I know that, Marcus Garvey was, at least the members of the Garvey movement were founders of the ANC in South Africa. So,
that's fantastic. I didn't know that.
Same thing in Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. Marcus Garvey's ideas and words fueled the Kikuyu national movement that became the Mau Mau rebellion that drove the British out and gave, Kenya a nation, and threw up Jomo Kenyatta. The same thing in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah. He was a disciple and a devotee of Marcus Garvey. And he took Garveyism back to Ghana, when he went back there in 1947. And, when the country became independent, his speech, he mentioned Marcus Garvey. And, of course, he did have a shipping line called the Black Star Line. And, of course, the Ghana soccer players are called the Black Stars. So he's done it all over the world, except here in the United States. He still has a criminal, record, and I think it needs to be expunged. And that's where I'm at in terms of leading a charge now to get a posthumous presidential pardon.
So, for those who've just tuned in, we're very proud here on WPFW and Pacific to have Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the legendary Marcus Garvey. And you're educating a lot of people here. It sounds to me like your father, Marcus Garvey, was a man who really changed the world, who really had a significant impact on how the people of Africa addressed getting free from the colonial and imperial rule in so many countries. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
No, well, that's the truth, really, and it's the history that's subverted.
Right.
You see, because it was an anti-colonial movement by my father, and the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, and African Communities League, which was founded in 1914, and he came to this country and brought that message in 1916. Basically, at the invitation of the head of Booker T. Washington, the head of Tuskegee. They had communicated, etc. And he wanted to build, our people up, from the bottom, so to speak, in terms of, jobs, etc., as a foundation, an economic base. And he thought that the Booker T. Washington's model was great, and this is what he wanted to duplicate as an economic base. And then, of course, he added his own, cultural and Pan-African ideology behind it. But, all of the nations in the Caribbean and the nations in Africa owe their liberation to Marcus Garvey. And, Brother Malcolm X said that quite explicitly. He said all the freedom movements that are going on right now, of course, this was in the 60s, both in the United States, throughout the Caribbean and Africa, owe their origin to Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And that's true.
I think it's it's important right now. I tell you why, because we're seeing a movement in America today where there is people are kind of rejecting a culture of racism, rejecting some of the cultural status quo and norms that have been in place for a long time. The Black Lives Matter movement, and I think what's wonderful to me when I see the marches, the Black Lives Matter movement marches, is seeing there's a lot of white people out there. There are a lot of the Native Americans. There are a lot of Latino. There are a lot of people who are rejecting a status quo in America that has kept people of color down and in recent years really been very hard on the working class and the working poor overall. And so I think the discussion of a person like Marcus Garvey is very, very appropriate now and salient. So tell me why do you feel, state for our audience, we can certainly get people to support it, but why you feel it's important for a man like Marcus Garvey, for your father, to have his record cleared, because of course someone would say, well, he's gone, it's all over now. To explain exactly why it's so important to have his record cleared once and for all.
Well, you can actually draw a straight line from 1916 when my dad came to this country to 2016. At that time,
I didn't think about that. 100 years exactly. Yeah.
There were about 37 lynchings at that time. Soldiers who were coming back, from fighting for democracy were being lynched in the South. the Ku Klux Klan, you know, in the early 20s and before the 20s, was marauding, against our African people. In 1917, East St. Louis was burned to the ground, which is a black town, and they wanted a white-only town. 1919 was the Red Summer, when there were riots in Chicago. They killed a little boy in a swimming pool because he crossed the line with a
right.
black and white. So, you know, that was the milieu in which he came. Now you go from there to 2016, when they're shooting black people, black men, and abusing black women, but shooting black men down in the street. And you say, well, you know, what has happened in between? And then when you look in between and you see, you know, Martin Luther King and you see Brother Malcolm X Shabazz in the 60s, and then you realize both of those people were assassinated. Okay? So what does that tell you about the arc of racism in this United States? When you have a man like Marcus Garvey, who was framed by J. Edgar Hoover, because, as J. Edgar Hoover said, there's a black liberator up in Harlem, and we've got to get him.
Yeah, right.
And what does that say when you have all this stuff going on in between, and now you have Black Lives Matter, and then people are jumping up and saying, well, all lives matter. Of course, you know all lives matter. But black lives are the ones that are at risk. You see?
Right.
So if you look, you can see that the system of injustice has continued unabated from Marcus Garvey. And Americans in prison. You know, we have the largest prison population in the world here in the United States of America.
Right.
Okay? And, you know, 36% of that prison population is African American. Right. And we only represent 13% of the population. Exactly. So we're overrepresented. That's the only place we're overrepresented, you know, in America.
Right.
So what does our citizenship mean? You know, 40 to 50% of young black men are involved in the prison system somehow. Either they're in jail or in the reform school or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So we are being criminalized as a people.
And I have to add...
And you know what happens when you have a criminal record. I mean, you're virtually not a citizen. You can't get a job. You can't vote. You know what I'm saying? You're on your way to being enslaved as a person. You're a non-entity. You're invisible.
Right. And
okay, so tell me what has changed. And this is why it's important for people to understand that this did not happen yesterday. You see, it took a generation after Marcus Garvey was convicted, imprisoned, the sentence was commuted, and then he was deported. It took a generation, 40 years, before you could get a Malcolm and a Martin.
Right.
Okay? And then from the 60s now, it has taken another generation, okay, to get to the young people who are out there in the streets now and saying, we're sick and tired.
Right. And it's important. You know, you mentioned prison, and most Americans don't know this. Most Americans think, I would say 99% of Americans, if you ask them, is slavery illegal in the United States, they would say yes, it is. When it's not. The 13th Amendment clearly says that involuntary servitude is banned unless duly convicted of a crime. If you are a prisoner, if you are in jail, you can still be a slave. The 13th Amendment did not ban slavery for people who are in prison. That's why people who are in prison today, are basically rented out to corporations. So we have slavery, and there's no one saying that. So you're right. Here we are in 2016, 100 years after your father got here. And in this day and age, slavery has never been outlawed in the United States.
I think that's a very important point, you know, and it reinforces what I'm saying. And the thing is that it is continuing and it is increasing.
Yes, of course.
You see, and it starts with lack of education, lack of job opportunities, lack of credit, you know, lack of training in terms of job skills. All of these things are endemic in the black communities. Lack of health care, you know, lead in the water, you know, other different poisons in the water. Right. I mean, you know, there's an attack on the black community in this country.
And once again, we're talking with Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the legendary Marcus Garvey, and part of the discussion, a significant part of the discussion, is Dr. Garvey's move to have his father, Marcus Garvey, have his father's criminal record expunged. I guess that's the term you want, isn't it? Expunged?
Yes. Basically what we're saying is exoneration, but the only method that we have at the present time is the posthumous pardon. Now, we have gone through the Congress because, in 1987,
was it John Conyers who interested? I think it
was John Conyers,
yes.
Introduced us, and the House Judiciary Committee with myself, my brother John Henry Clark, Tony Martin, Lewis, a whole bunch of us testifying to the character, etc., of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. But it didn't get out of the House Judiciary Committee. And then Charles Rangel picked it up, 2004, and he kept House resolutions to exonerate Marcus Garvey going every year until very recently. So that, we have tried those other processes, political processes, and now the only process left, so to speak, unless we sue the United States, which again, would happen 50 years from now.
Yeah, right.
The lawsuit would still be going on and so on and so on and so forth. But what we have done is we've engaged a law firm in Washington, D.C., who has done, great work for us pro bono, and they've gone over the case. The law firm is Aiken Gump. But they've gone over the case. They've pointed out the discrepancies, the illegalities, the perjury that took place, by the attorney, coaching a witness to lie and said he was employed by the UNIA. The empty envelope, that was the only piece of evidence. They've done all of this, turned it inside out. That's part of our petition that we've placed on the president's desk. So when he says now it's a posthumous pardon, he has to say because he was not guilty and there was a miscarriage of justice.
I would like.
So that's how we see it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
One of the things I do, I have a page. It's called that I'm an editor on with some other people, and it's called the Real Progressives page, and we've got like 84,000 people who are on the page. And one of the things that I always try to do is to try to encourage progressives who are white Americans to join in the struggle, to join in the fight for justice and fairness with people of color, because, when we look at what happened with Marcus Garvey, when we look at what happens with black leaders, that is an obvious and very pronounced incident of attack and of going after someone who is trying to stop injustice and who is going after the status quo, who is rejecting kind of an unfair status quo. It is an example of it, but it is not the only example of it. And that happens with, if you're white, green, gray, or grizzly, if you go after the status quo, you can rest assured, when you fight City Hall is going to swing back. And they're going to swing back with a big fist. And so I try to make the argument to white progressives in America that it benefits them to join in the struggle for injustice, because if we can get the white progressives in America to join with the people of color, which, let's face it, that's out of 300 million people now, 100 million of them are people of color. And if we can get the left, the labor and the progressives to join in this struggle with black Americans for fairness, for justice, for issues like this, and we get that kind of unity, this is a powerful block, both voting and economic and social block that can't be, that can't be overlooked. So
you're 100% right, and the inequities that exist in the United States are not just racial inequities,
right,
but they're economic inequities, and
right.
I mean that hits across the board. Whether you're white, as you say, green or black. And, we had that whole movement, in terms of Wall Street. We had that whole movement a few years ago, which has somewhat fizzled out. But that was a recognition by young people, white people mostly, who understood the fairness and the injustice of the unfairness and the injustice of the inequity in the economic system, whereby, the top 5% or the top 1%, if you wish, owns, 90% of the wealth of the country. I mean, that is ridiculous. The wealth is here for all of us to share. So there needs to be some change in that economic system that allows all of us to benefit from what is produced, by our labor. So one thing is not divorced from the other, which is exactly what you're saying. And we all need to join together. And as you know, that's one of the ploys that has been used by the status quo,
yes,
is to try to divide us, whether it's by, black or white, or it's immigrant, or, it's Latino versus whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be smart enough to move beyond that kind of division.
Yes, definitely. Once again, we're talking with Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the legendary activist, a businessman, entrepreneur, leader, a world leader, Marcus Garvey. Yes, see, I think, here's what I believe. If we can get, say, white progressives and white Americans to recognize that it's not just class, it's race. And if we can get black people to realize that it's not just race, it's class. Right? If we can get both sides to realize that, then they'll join together and they can get together and realize, look, we've got a huge block. If we get all together, this block cannot be denied. There's just too many of us. But I think, fortunately, you get a lot of white Americans who they understand that it's class, but they don't feel race, they don't see it, and so they're empathetic towards it, but they don't act on it. And then you have a lot of black people who, let's face it, the race issue is boiling all over them every day. And so they don't, because they're dealing with the issue every day of discrimination and injustice based on race, that to be quite honest, they don't get to the point of class. Because I would like to see that, and I would like to see a more of a kind of a rainbow coalition, to use a kind of a hackneyed term, join for causes such as this. For causes Now, is there a website? If people want to support your effort? Once again, we're talking with Dr. Julius Garvey, son of the legendary activist and leader Marcus Garvey. If people want to join in, if they want to support your effort for a posthumous pardon for your father, for the injustice that he suffered at the hands of one J. Edgar Hoover, how can people support that? Is there something they can do? Is somebody they can write?
I would like your 84,000 progressives to, number one, start to tweet the president and Valerie Jarrett at POTUS. That's their Twitter handle.
Okay.
At POTUS. POTUS is acronym for President of the United States. And at VJ44. And if all 84,000 tweet both of those people, I think something is likely to happen. But they can follow us on our website, which is Justice for Garvey. Justice, the number 4, Garvey.
Okay, Justice.
And also, yes, and also our Twitter handle is Justice for Garvey, without the 4.
Okay. Wonderful. Once again, we're talking to Dr. Julius Garvey, son of the legendary activist and leader Marcus Garvey. So tell us a little bit about your father that we may not know, a little bit about it. We've probably got a lot of people listening that don't know a lot about your father and his history. So tell us a little bit about his life.
Yeah, well, it's a little hard to condense it, but,
give us some of the highlights.
I mentioned the period of time in which he came to the United States. And one has to realize that he was basically born 250 years, into slavery, and 50 years after the end of slavery, and 3 years after the origin of colonialism, which started with the Berlin Conference in 1885. So that he grew up in that environment, and he saw the conditions of African people all over the world, because he traveled all over the world. And he said that he had to do something to elevate us. We had been dehumanized and depersonalized for basically 300 years. And he saw the result of that. And he knew that what he had to do was link us back to our origin. As he said, a people without a knowledge of their origin, history, and culture is like a tree without roots. And he also knew that part of the damage was mental, meaning, that we had absorbed a lot of lies and a lot of propaganda about how horrible Africa was, and that we were somehow benefited by enslavement because Africa was so horrible, and slavery was beneficial. It was Christian charity to come there, take us out, and work us to death.
Right, yeah.
So he said, He said we have to emancipate our minds from mental slavery. He said some people can help us to free the body, but none but ourselves can free our mind. So this was the basis of what he said, of what he was teaching. To, up humanity race, you can accomplish what you will. He said, nature and God made us, and what we are, but we make ourselves what we want to be. So, we have this perfect gift from God, which is our humanity, but then we have to express it. So he was doing everything to negate the negative propaganda and break us free from mental dependence and mental slavery. So he integrated history, culture, education, and an economic base in terms of his solution to the problem that we face. And of course, what he attempted to do was unite all of us as a people. You see, in those days, he said 400 million, African people all over the world. Of course, now we are 1.2 billion African people all over the world. That's a hefty number. That's just behind China and India. You see, so we're not a small number of people.
Right.
And of course, we have the richest continent. So he always focused on Africa. He said, we have to build our nation there, because as a geopolitical unit, we can sit at the table of nations when we have the richest continent in the world and we have 1.2 billion people. So he was saying, up united people, you can accomplish what you will. Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. I think that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, okay. And the other thing I think that was great about what your father did, once again, we're talking to Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the legendary activist and leader Marcus Garvey. And one of the things that you said was that he was one of the early people in America who was really pushing for black people, who saw that it was economics was important. Because black people in America at that point were living in such dire, abject poverty everywhere. And he saw the importance of making some economic changes and of black people, because what was it in the 1920s where they had the Black Wall Street? I think it was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that the Klan went in and burned down and killed a couple, 3,000 people or something?
Yes, yeah. I don't know the number of people, but they did burn, you call it Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah.
Yeah, they had 2 hospitals. I mean, they had an incredible amount of wealth that they had. They had
every
achieved.
time we have risen up as a people, we have been knocked down, and that's documented quite well by Dr. Anderson in our book White Rage. I hope you've read it, or your listeners need to read it.
Oh, you need to
where it documents the struggle of African people against white racism.
So you need to tell us, what's the book?
White Rage. White
Rage, and it's by who?
White Rage, and it's by Dr. Carol Anderson. She's a PhD.
Okay, very, very
Carolnderson. You really need to read it.
I think
the subtitle is The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide.
Okay, great. I think a lot of people, when I first learned about your father, Marcus Garvey, the first I learned about, the kind of the Pan-Africanism, about, a movement for black people to go back to Africa. There was a lot of discussion back then that black people couldn't get any, really could never any justice or peace unless they went back, went to Africa. And I was kind of up in the air about that. But now that I've learned more, I understand that at the time period where your father was living and trying to lead people for fairness and justice, there really wasn't any hope in America for anything. The reality was there wasn't any hope there for anything. People were being lynched, people were being murdered, and there wasn't any hope for justice really any other way than to look for some kind of a radical solution. And so I'm starting to understand more why people like Marcus Garvey and then Malcolm X kind of wanted separation, because from their perspective, they didn't see any hope for integration. They didn't see any hope for justice or fairness.
A couple of things I want to say. One, is that people sometimes use phrases. And you have to deconstruct it, because very often that phrase is put in your mouth or put in your mind by somebody else. For example, to characterize Marcus Garvey's movement as a Back to Africa movement was designed as a slur to say to Black America, "Gee, you don't want to go back to Africa. Africa is this, is that, it's that. It's the jungle." And, they put white people in a pot. The old Tarzan movies.
Right, yes.
You see, so it was designed to again, confused the mind of African people. Marcus Garvey didn't want to move all black people back to Africa. But he said Africa is our homeland, it's our continent. And if you look at the Jewish situation, the Jews don't want every Jew to go back to Palestine or Israel, but they needed a homeland. Everybody needs a homeland. We were displaced. We were the diaspora. We need a homeland. Some of us need to go there and develop it for ourselves. You see, so it was a two-phase thing. Yes, we need a nation because the ideal of every people is nationhood. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's no people that have an origin or have status in the world that are not represented by a nation. That's why nationalism is so important. It's a major socio political entity. So we had nothing. We didn't have a flag. He gave us a flag. We didn't have an anthem. He gave us an anthem, mm-hmm. and he said that continent is ours. You see, so again, the Black Star Line was not to carry people back to Africa. It was to trade between Africa, the Caribbean, and America. Oh, so and then the other phrase that I want to discuss is the business of separation. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with separation. You can't separate people in the world. But what it had to do with was independence. Ah, okay. But there are some people who buy into the separation, even some black people, and say they wanted a separate piece of land somewhere in the South. Marcus Garvey never said that. Okay? Never said, separate off yourself, within the United States or whatever it is. No, but we are an independent people with an independent, unique history and culture and belief system. That's who we are. We have the longest history in the world. We have a history over 6,000 years. We're the first human beings. Homo sapiens sapiens is us, 200,000 years ago. There were no, white people before about 40,000 years. As a matter of fact, less than that. Because the first Europeans that they found were black Europeans, were African Europeans 40,000 years ago. So white people mutated sometime between 40,000 years and then when they found first skeletons somewhere around 15,000 years ago. So, we need to know that. So, we're not dependent on anybody else. We're the original people. You see, so we don't have to separate from anything. Others have separated from us in terms of migrating out of the continent. So I think, that's a little bit of an illusion. But yes, we need to be independent as a people, independent of anybody telling us what to do, where to go, and how to do it.
Thank you. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a couple calls. Would you be okay with that?
Yes, definitely, because, I'm enjoying your show.
Thank you. The number is 202-588-0893, 202-588-0893. I have Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of legendary Marcus Garvey. I am so proud to have you on here, and I am sure that I'm going to have some callers that are very honored to get the opportunity to speak with you. 202-588-0893, Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the legendary activist and leader Marcus Garvey, a man who changed the course of history, a man who was the spark to change imperialist domination, European imperialist domination on the African continent, and a lot of countries, a lot of people were freed from European rulership, from colonialism, as a result of him and his leadership and his great works. And I certainly want to thank you and honor your father and tell you, I'm proud. The two people that I've had on my show, three actually on my show, I'm so proud to have had Paul Robeson Jr. I'm so proud to have had Congressman John Conyers, and I'm certainly very proud to have had you on this show.
Well, I'm in great company. Thank you.
to brilliant. The stories that I heard from Paul Robeson Jr., the stories that I heard, the connection. Because, to be honest, when I was in school, I grew up in a mostly white area. None of this stuff was in the there was no Paul Robeson Jr.'s. There was no Malcolm X's. There was no Marcus Garvey's. The best we got is Eli Whitney or somebody making a cotton gin. That's about the best we got. There was none of that stuff going on. We got like Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 kind of stuff in my textbook, and it's great to have.
That's one of the problems with our young kids today. They don't know their potential. They don't know what their grandfathers and their great great-grandfathers have accomplished.
Yes, and if
for what they too can accomplish.
And if you're Italian, you hear about Michelangelo. If you're French, you hear about Renoir. If you're here, there's great. If you're German, there's some. There in around the world, if you're Greek, you've got the great Greek philosophers. And unfortunately, black people are written out of history. We don't hear about our great leaders, our great artists enough, and people don't realize how important that is. Bill Witherspoon is a great man himself. He's on the other side of the glass making this happen, and we got some callers. Who we got first, Bill?
Yusuf,
you are on with Dr. Julius Garvey, and welcome to WPFW.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, more accurately, I read an article in Economist magazine that said that the Mongoloid race diverged from the black race within the last 100,000 years, and that the Caucasoid race diverged from the Mongolian or the Mongoloid within the last 10,000 years, that they say is more likely to be in the past 6,000 years as a white, as a white-skinned Caucasian.
Well, if I may, Yusuf, I'll throw this in here. I don't think really with Dr. Garvey, I don't think this is really about, kind of the history of the, the human person, going from a blob of protoplasm, ending up being what we are today. I think this is more about the importance of our history, of American history, of black history, of world history, and things of that nature. So if you have another question for Dr. Garvey, that would be wonderful, because I certainly appreciate you calling. But I really think if we could get into maybe some more historical perspective in a little bit more modern times.
I'm only saying you were talking in specifics, and, I just gave what sounded to me to be more accurate.
All right, thank you very much, Yusuf. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Garvey. Let's take another caller. Who do you have, Bill?
Ayub.
Oh, some interesting names. Ayub, welcome. You're on with Dr. Garvey.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. Garvey. Just wanted to know his father's works back home in his homeland in Jamaica. What was his involvement after he came to the States? Was he still involved in doing work in Jamaica?
Yes. Very good question. But, I think I mentioned earlier on that after his sentence was commuted in 1927, he was deported back to Jamaica. Mm-hmm. And, he entered politics in Jamaica. He was elected to the, what was called the Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation Council, with like a city council here. Mm-hmm. He formed the first political party in Jamaica, which was the People's Political Party. Mm-hmm. And he also formed the first labor union in Jamaica. So he was very, very active in politics. And he ran the UNIA, Universal Legal Improvement Association, ACL, from Kingston, Jamaica. And I think they had the first international convention after he was deported. I think he was in 1934 in Jamaica. He had another one in 1939. And, of course, the crowds that came from all around the world were like some of the largest that had ever been seen in Jamaica. So he continued his work. And the last international convention was in Toronto, Canada in 1938. He moved to England in 1935 because the political situation, again, in Jamaica was hampering him because people could not vote because, they tied the voting to land ownership. And, of course, only the white people own land. Right. Because the same thing happened here in the post-slavery situation. There was no 40 acres on a mule. There was nothing. Reparations were given to the white planters, not to the black people. So black people didn't have land. I mean, a few obviously had some land, but mostly black people were scraping. Yes. And were tenant farmers and were being, again, employed by the white plantation owners. So they could not vote. So that the political situation was difficult. So he moved up to England in 1935, where he interacted with a lot of the West African students. He helped out people in the West African Students Union, And as I mentioned, some of these people went on to become, serious nationalists in their home countries. Whether it was, Malawi, South Africa, now Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. So he was very, very active, post leaving the United States of America.
Thank you. All right, Bill, who do we have next?
Morami.
Morami, you are on with Dr. Julius Garvey, son of the legendary Marcus Garvey. Morami, are you there?
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, no, this is Shayla.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to hang up and call back. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of background. Sorry about that. All right. Okay.
All right.
Bill. All right, Bill, let's go with our next caller.
Church,
you are on the air on WPFW.
Hello?
Yes, Church, you're on the air with Dr. Julius Garvey.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Garvey. I just want to say how honored I am just to speak to you, because I always think of your father every chance I get. Shook hands with Nat King Cole, wrote Chamberlain. I wrote Frank Sinatra's son-in-law, Westfall's first recording, and it is an honor and a pleasure to have spoken to you.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad that we, that our callers get a chance to call in and speak with you. It's a great honor for me, too, and I certainly appreciate it. Bill, who do we have next?
Mike,
you're on the air with Dr. Julius Garvey.
Good evening.
Yes.
It's an honor to talk to you, Dr. Garvey.
Thank you.
I agree with you in a lot of things, but especially when you said Africa is the key to our success as black people.
Mm-hmm.
Once the continent, takes control of its own resources and, gain the power that it actually has, then a lot of things will change. I think there is a change coming about right now, and that is in Zimbabwe. Mugabe has kicked out all the foreigners. He's taken control of the land and the resources. I mean, it devastated the economy for a while, but they expected it. And the economy is slowly starting to come back, and I think a lot of the other countries are going to follow. I think South Africa will be next. Can you imagine there's a town in South Africa where there are no blacks allowed?
Really, at this time?
At this point in time. I mean, reconciliation, the only thing that reconciliation helped was the people that were already in power. It allowed them to maintain the wealth that they had. They didn't share anything. So I think in time, South Africa is going to go by way of Zimbabwe, and I think this is going to create a chain reaction, and the pendulum is going to start swinging back in the opposite direction.
Thank you for your call, Dr. Garvey. A quick question. So I know you've done a lot of speaking. Have you done? You do some speaking. Have you done a lot of speaking engagements throughout Africa?
As a matter of fact, I think probably 3 months ago, I was in the Western Cape, at the Eastern Cape, at the invitation of the Steve Biko Foundation and the Robert Sobukwe Foundation, where I delivered a lecture, which was the 10th annual Robert Sobukwe lecture. And then we went on to Namibia, where, again, there was a very strong Garvey base. Sam Nujoma, who was the first president, was very much a Garveyite. So, yes, I've spoken in Johannesburg, at the African Union conferences, etc. And I agree with the gentleman who is speaking that Africans need to get control of our resources, Africans at home and Africans abroad. It's very, very important. And the solution, that came about in South Africa, it was clearly a compromise, and it was intended to prevent bloodshed, but it did not change the economic basis of the country adequately.
Right.
So while it gave political control to the majority, the economy is still in the hands of the minority.
Right.
And the recent government, has shown a significant degree of ineptitude in terms of bringing about changes. So there's a lot of unrest there. And obviously, there will be changes in the future.
Yes, I heard I went here in D.C. and heard one of the leaders of the labor movement in South Africa, the Black labor movement, speak, and he talked about how the labor had been, kind of one of the things that we're seeing here in America, and that is that labor had supported certain politicians, and they had expected certain things from the politicians, and the politicians would give them nothing. And then every 4 years or so, they'd come back to labor and say, we want you to support us again. And that labor is getting to the end of their rope, and they're ready to say to them, you know what? We're not supporting you. We're not afraid anymore. You're going to lose power. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And that labor was being taken care of. The Black labor union was being taken advantage of and getting nothing, none of the things that they'd ask for, housing, a number of things. And he just said, they would get a lot of talk leading up to the election, and once they got their votes, it was see you later, which is pretty much, that's what we see here in America, too. Once again, Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of Marcus Garvey, we are so proud and honored to have him on. Who do we have next, Bill?
Selah,
you are on with Dr. Garvey.
Yes, hello?
Hi.
Hi. I just had a question for Dr. Garvey. You said I'm on now?
You are on the air.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so my name is Shayla, and basically, I'm listening to this in the car with my kids, because I feel like it's, so important for them to hear these types of conversations. And so my question, obviously it's an honor and a privilege just to be on the phone with you. So I want to say that first off. But I guess my question would be in terms of, as a mother, of 4 children and 2 of them being African-American boys, what's the way moving forward in terms of, education for our children, early childhood? What can we do starting in the home so that, we can continue and further your father's mission?
Well, that's the key, really, because I think, as everybody said, by the time a kid gets to, grade 4 or grade 6 or something, they're lost. So that a lot of it has to do with their home education and their home training and what they get from their parents. And even if you're a single parent, you can still provide the discipline and the character building. Because, my father died when I was 8 years old, so I was raised by my mother. And, myself and my brother were raised by my mother. But she always held, my father up to us as our ideal. And every time we did something that was a little bit off, she'd say, your father was not, I want that, to see you doing that, and it would be a disgrace to your father and the memory of your father, and so on and so forth. And, of course, it's education. Of course, the system of education now does not, validate who we are as a people, but then they have to study outside of school. Because don't forget, every other ethnic group, whether you're Jewish or Japanese or Korean or whatever it is, they have their after-school studies program where they learn their history and their culture, apart from what's taught in America. So this is something that we have to do, and that's something that the UNIA was all about at that time in terms of what my dad was trying to do. Education, character building. Because, in your, as he said, if you're a failure in life, you are failed. You have failed. It's not the circumstances around you that have made you fail. You have failed. So you have to put that into the minds of your youngsters, boys and girls, that they will meet obstacles, but they have the potential. They are God's gift to the world, and they have everything that they need to make a success of their lives if they apply themselves consistently and with courage.
Thank you very much for calling in and supporting WPFW and my radio show. Bill, who do we have next?
Ambrose.
Ambrose, you're on the air with Dr. Julius Garvey. And make sure you turn your radio down, Ambrose, because I want to get you on, and we've got a lot of feedback.
All right.
You have to turn your radio down, Ambrose.
Is it down?
Yes, okay. You're on the air.
Good evening, Dr. Garvey. I am so honored to be able to talk to you. This is Ambrose Lane Jr. I'm sorry?
Thanks for calling in, Ambrose.
It's my pleasure. Could you please clarify your father's position on limited capitalism because there's a lot of malarkey that's out there on that subject.
Yeah,
and then second, there's been some mentions through those supporting the Black Lives Movement of moving black money out of white banks. Could you comment on that, please?
Okay. Basically, my father's understanding, or what he felt was necessary, was, quotes, capitalism, because he felt that communism and socialism took the incentive away from the individual to do the best that he could, whether it was in business or other areas. So that he did not want the total economy to rest in the state. But what he said was that the state needed to run the high point of the economy. In other words, if you have, gold and silver, diamonds and oil, that should be run by the state. That should not be run by individual capitalists. And he gave a number to limit the amount that a corporation should have or that an individual should have in terms of a business and income. Those numbers at this point in time would not be realistic. You'd have to transpose them to current numbers in terms of, how cost of living has changed, et cetera, et cetera. But he believed in a structured economy whereby the wealth of the country was to benefit the people. Mm-hmm. And he felt that this needs to be regulated overall, by the state. So he talked about a mixed economy, whereas there would be small and medium-sized businesses, but the large businesses that change the direction of the company, of the country, and that the country may go to war about, should not be in the hands of individuals or corporations, because they'll take you to war, and then your young people have to go out there and die, and so on and so forth, and they're not getting the benefit from why these people are going to war. And all you have to do is look at the Iraq War and ask yourself, why did so many people die? When there were no weapons of mass destruction, and all of us know it was about oil. So you see, so he was against that kind of capitalism that does that. But he understood that you had to have a mixed economy. You can't just be out there and everybody, quotes, is working for the government, because it won't work. It's against human nature.
Thank you.
People have to have an incentive to work for themselves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garvey. All right, Bill, I'd like to get a couple more calls in if we can. Give them a minute each, and because it's great to have a guest like Dr. Garvey. Who do you have next?
Aize,
you're on the phone with Dr. Julius Garvey.
Peace. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for, just continuing a tremendous tradition. And, you are a living legend walking in the light.
I'm a legend in my own mind. Never mind. Thank you anyway.
No, bless you. So, my question is, do you come to D.C. often? And peace to the WPFW family. This is Aize. Do you come to D.C. often? Because I run an educational nonprofit called Mommy's TLC, and we actually specialize in teaching our children about our story. In fact, we even wrote a book called Telling Children Our Story, and we won a White House award from First Lady Michelle Obama for this innovative method of teaching children about present as well as past leaders. And what I'm
let me stop you right there. It's not that I come
children
to DC often.
Various sites that Mommy's runs. Maybe work on a letter writing campaign to exonerate the Honorable Marcus Garvey. And again, if you get to DC often, we would love to possibly have you even talk with them, because that would blow their mind. They've been able to meet some other great people, and to be able to hear from you talking about this great work that continues will be tremendous.
Okay,
so are you in D.C. often, and how can we get in contact with you?
Okay, Dr. Garvey.
Well, I think you gave the website before. We can give it again, justiceforgarvey.org, and they can go there and get in touch with me through that website. It's not that I come to D.C. often. I come often enough. I've been there, like twice or three times in the last month, and I'll be in D.C. again next weekend. But I'd be happy to come to your school at some appropriate time, etc. It sounds like what you're doing is a wonderful work, and I would definitely support it 100% in any way that I can.
Oh, that would be wonderful. And if they go to justice for with the letter, I mean the numeral for
the number
justice number for Garvey.com and
.org.
.org. Ooh,
yeah,
.org.
Yeah. It may work with .com too, but it's really .org.
And they can get in contact with you through that.
Yes.
Fantastic. We get another call. Okay, we'll do one more caller.
Kenya,
you are on with Dr. Garvey.
Hello?
Make sure your radio's turned down so we don't get any feedback.
Okay.
Yes, Kenya, you've got 1 minute.
Hi, yes. First of all, I want to say what an honor it is to talk to you, Dr. Garvey. I appreciate
the honor is mine, my dear. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I just wanted to say to you that you're really like a brother, because I know so many people like myself who had, done very well in the European school system. And then when we got to the point where we discovered our own history, primarily through, being exposed to HBCUs, when, it's kind of doom and gloom, and it's very depressing, especially, once you trusted the system, and to discover the magnitude to which, Black Americans, African Americans, Native Americans have been oppressed, and to come across your father, for so many people I know, it was really just a light in the tunnel. And, not just to see him and to read his words, but the structure and the system that he gave us, which is really lacking with the movement today. So I just want to thank you for that. But my question is, your father is always pitted against W.E.B. Du Bois. And I was wondering if you had some insight. Did he see them as polar opposites, or did he think that they were kind of two sides of the same coin, or how did he see him? Thank you.
Thank you, and you will be our last caller.
Yeah, I think it was the other way around, because when my dad, came to this country, W.E.B. Du Bois was sort of a big dog, and my father's organization outstripped every other organization that was advocating black progress at the time, because, within a very few years after 1916, he had more than, 2 million members. He had international convention in 1920 that brought, 20,000 people to Madison Square Gardens, which was unheard of at that time, 25,000 people. And he brought 2,500 delegates from all over the world, sitting in convention in Liberty Hall up on 138th Street in Harlem. And they had the biggest parades through New York. I mean, they turned New York upside down. They turned the country upside down. You had 700 different Liberty Halls around the country with 2 million members. So there was a significant degree of jealousy on the part of W.E.B. Du Bois, who considered himself, a PhD, educated. Right. He was always talking about his Huguenot ancestry and all this other nonsense. And granted that he was a great scholar, if you will, as a sociologist and historian, but he did not understand the pulse of the people, and he did not understand really what was needed in terms of the transformation that was needed to bring people from their slavery and racism and colonial past into the future in terms of the 20th and the 21st century. His doctrine was the talented 10, where supposedly white America educates the top 10% of blacks or something, and then somehow this trickles down both economically and culturally, so that we would have nice black-white people, black on the outside and white on the inside. I mean, so that's a little bit of a characterization on my part, because he was one of the people that organized against my dad. Right. When my dad went to him and came to him, just as he came to Tuskegee, to talk to him, about the conditions of African people. But, Du Bois definitely had a different perspective. Interestingly, he changed later on, and he became the type of Pan-Africanist that my dad was, and he actually said that. And he ended up living in Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah gave him a job to write an Encyclopedia Africana.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Garvey. You're listening to WPFW 89.3 FM here in Washington, D.C., and tonight we have had the incredible honor of having Dr. Julius Garvey, who is the son of the legendary leader and activist, world-renowned, absolutely brilliant entrepreneur, Marcus Garvey. Thanks, Dr. Garvey, and I would love to have you on the show again sometime. I certainly would like to.
You will have me again if you tell everybody on your 84,000 other followers to tweet the White House At POTUS and at VJ44.
Okay, justiceforgarvey.org. We want to posthumously pardon your father, one Marcus Garvey. Thank you, sir. I appreciate
Thank you for having me.
All right. My name's Garland Nixon, WPFW 89.3 FM. Bill Witherspoon's on the other side making it happen. I want to thank Bill Witherspoon. Get in touch with me at Garland Nixon. The name, if you want to email me, it's garlandn@gmail.com. Peace. We are out.
Thanks for listening to the just completed public affairs or news program. As a listener-sponsored community radio station, WPFW appreciates your feedback, whether favorable or otherwise. To provide your feedback, even if it is regarding one of our many music programs, simply email us at info@wpfw.org. That's info@wpfw.org. Thanks.
You're listening to WPFW, The Messenger.
Because it's something they can do. It's something that's not hard to do. They can send out emails.
We do tweets all the time. We can put together what they call a thunderclap, where everybody gets together and then all the accounts start tweeting automatically at once, and you try to make it trend.